Members, thank you for coming. We have a quorum and it is the appointed time. Let us invite the administration team to come in. I hope we can finish off this regulation quickly today. First, I'd like to talk to you about the papers we have received since the last meeting. Those are 3 submissions because at the first meeting, after consulting members, we decided to invite submissions instead of inviting deputations to come for a hearing. That was the view of members. We have received 3 submissions, one of which is from the Sai Kung Kai To Business Association. In fact, this association has requested a meeting with the subcommittee. It would like to speak to the subcommittee. I'd like to consult Mr. Stephen Ho. Mr. Ho, sorry. There is something I need to consult you on. In the last minute, I was talking about the receipt of a submission because we decided last time that there was no need for a hearing. We have received altogether 3 submissions. The Sai Kung Kai To Business Association has requested a meeting with the subcommittee. But in fact, last time, you were of the view that there was already sufficient communication with the industry and this may not be necessary. So can I discuss with you? Even if we invite the association to come, I would give it only 5 minutes. I wouldn't give it 2 hours just because it's the only deputation. Well, of course. And if they come here just for 5 minutes, it will be a waste of time for them. Could I propose here that Mr. Stephen Ho and the administration please meet the Sai Kung Kai To Business Association and answer their questions in the submission? I think there are 2 main points. 1, transparency of prices. This is what has been requested by the entire industry. And the other one is convenience of refill stations. We have to take this up with the suppliers. Can the administration let us know the locations of refill stations? Will there be inconvenience caused because of a new oil product? Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Lai. Mr. Lee Sheng-hing, the Chairman of the Sai Kung Kai To Business Association, is of course a stakeholder. Earlier on, we set up a working group to talk to marine operators and whether there is feasibility in going for MLD. Mr. Lee was a member of the working group. Therefore, he is well versed with the drafting of the regulation. And as the chairman proposed, we can certainly arrange a meeting with Mr. Lee and we'll invite Mr. Stephen Ho to come as well. As for the points of supply, we understand there are over 100 marine diesel supply points. As to how many there are in Sai Kung, I do not have the information at hand, but we can certainly look it up for the reference of members. However, I can say for sure that this regulation only seeks to enhance the standard of the fuel product, requiring the MLD suppliers and also oil companies to purchase good quality fuel of a particular standard, and there should not be any impact on the points of supply. I agree. The suppliers will still be the suppliers. It is just that they are now required to supply better quality fuel. There will not be any change to the points of supply. We just have to make the arrangements with the suppliers. Mr. Ho, can you advise us on this? Last time we discussed this issue, it is just that they would change the oil in the oil tank. There would just be one oil product, and theoretically there will be no excuse for them to hike prices. This is what we talked about last time. However, I'd like to ask the administration if friends in SciComm have got this view. Does it mean that the previous consultation was not adequate? Or is it that we are wrong with the logic because they might think that there will be the supply of two particular oil products? Ms. Chairman, you talked about supplying fuel amongst fishermen or other operators in emergency. We believe we should go for higher standard fuel, but then have you done enough publicity so that they would not be trapped by the new regulation? Even if we ask you to write in exemption for emergency supply, it will be very difficult. So the government has to take action to make up for this gap. And as to the meeting, I can arrange for that after today's meeting with the administration. Okay, so you agree that we need to take up those 2 points in the SciComm Kaito Business Association submission. 1, transparency of pricing, and 2, points of supply. So Mr. Stephen Ho and the administration will organize a meeting with the business association. Can I add one point? It is not that everybody in the industry is so aware of our progress. I think we can write to other business associations, say people from Tuen Mun and other districts. Maybe you should organize a meeting involving such Kaito business associations in the territory. Okay? This is to do some promotion. It is not about the content of the law as such.
So we may not necessarily have to delay our scrutiny of this bill. Also, I will also need to deal with the 2 other submissions. First of all, submission from the HKIE. And the main points they are making in the submission is that they would like to ask for a grace period. We can certainly discuss that in a while. And also they are concerned that some vessels coming to Hong Kong may still have low quality fuels in the oil tanks, the oil which contain has a high sulfur content. But this is not something that we have to address through this bill. We are basically trying to make improvements in terms of the supply side. So if other fuels are stored in the tanks of such vessels, it's not something that will come within the purview of this bill. So if according to based on what the HIE is saying, I think the government will have a lot of publicity to work on. Yes, certainly we need to enhance our publicity. Previously, we focused on the quality of the fuel products, and therefore we had more liaison with the oil companies and the suppliers. And also initially, when we tested this type of fuels, we had more exchanges with the industry. But I think the concern of the chair and Mr. Stephen Ho is right. Although the bill specifies the standard for the MLD, but we also need to ensure that for the users, they would have a basic understanding of the bill. And if they were to buy fuel from people with suspicious, background, or if they need to purchase oil on an emergency basis, they would need to know what will be the consequences. And I think we need to do more publicity in those areas. The third letter is from an oil company. Well, this is actually a submission from ExxonMobil Hong Kong. And again, they're asking for a grace period. And they say also in the submission that if our requirement is even higher than the IMO standard and the standard in neighboring jurisdictions, the ocean-going vessels may not come to Hong Kong. Do members or the administration have any views on this point? Mr. Lai. Madam Chair, if I may make a simple response. When we work on the standard for MLD, we had worked very closely with the oil companies. We looked at the standard at which impact the standard for the fuels, and that technically the supply, there's no problem with supply, and that the prices are affordable. ExxonMobil had all along participated in our deliberation. When we decided on the standard, we've also adopted the views. At one stage, when we consider the sulfur content for the MLD, we had a higher standard in mind, except that we received submissions from the oil company that this type of better quality fuels are not, commonly available in Asia. If we were to adopt that type of fuels, it would be a lot more expensive. So we therefore we've taken aboard of the views of the oil company, and that the sulfur content of 0.05% is more commonly available in Asia, and there's only a difference of only 1%, and that's why we've adopted the standard as proposed in the regulations. I also hope members will understand that the purpose of the regulation is focused on the standard of fuel applied to local vessels. Internationally, different countries would tend to have two standards. One standard governing the supply of fuel to local vessels, and another standard applicable to vessels coming from other countries. Even for the EU, when we talk about, well, they do not apply the same yardstick for applicable to local vessels. Those applicable to local vessels were even more stringent. So we're now, setting a higher standard for fuel supply to local vessels, and this is compatible with international standards. It will also not affect the ocean-going vessels' ability to procure fuels. In North America and Europe, where they have emission control zones, the ocean-going vessels cannot use fuels with sulfur content of more than 0.1. So we've now set the standard at 0.05%. So the ocean-going vessels will have no problems if they use such fuels if they go to Europe and North America. If we set a standard at 0.2, then these vessels may not be able to go to those jurisdictions. So for this type of fuel, other than serving the local market in Hong Kong, for the ocean-going vessels going to other jurisdictions, I think such fuels would also enable them to comply with the standards in those countries. So, do members have any further comments regarding the submission from the oil company and Mr. Lai's response? If not, let's deal with the fourth letter, which is a letter from Mr. Kenneth Chen. And I think at the last meeting we were up to section 4, bracket 2 of the regulation. That is, military vessels could be exempted. Mr. Kenneth Chen would like the government to further explain this point so that the definition could be made clearer. So I think at this point we can go back to the clause by clause, starting with section 4. Mr. Lai, could you respond to Mr. Kenneth Chen's request about exemption for military vessels? Now, if members would look at section B of our response, and that is under the regulations, why is it that for military vessels or vessels used for a military purpose, there will be an exemption, but we've not come up with a definition. Under the laws of Hong Kong, there are certain legislation regulating the operations of vessels, shipping vessels. In those ordinances, exemptions are granted to military vessels, but for the in those other jurisdictions, legislation, there is no definition of warship or military vessels. So a general understanding would be that warship is a very special type of shipping vessels, which is quite obvious, and therefore we may not need to provide a definition for warship in the legislation. Mr. Kenneth Chen is also concerned about another point, which is that if we provide exemptions for warships, how would that adversely affect our effort to improve air quality in Hong Kong? Well, members can rest assured here, because if we talk about the ocean-going vessels, in the last few years we have on average 30,000 ocean-going vessels visiting Hong Kong. Warships is only a very small number by comparison. So the exemption here will not really have adversely affect our effort to improve air quality in Hong Kong. Whether it's the IMO or in the United States or the EU, they again provide similar exemptions to warships pursuant to their maritime legislation. Members, any further views? I've talked to Mr. Kenneth Chan because right now he needs to attend another meeting, and that's why I'm following up on this point on his behalf. I think it's easier in the case of warships. If you have a carrier, aircraft carrier, of course you can't call it anything else but a warship. But there may be vessels which fall under a gray area. Let's say a certain vessel could be classified as vessels on a military service. If people on a vessel ordered a pizza, then the vessel delivering the pizza should not be regarded as being used for a military purpose. But if it is a supply vessel, or if the vessel need to be berthed at a place where you have deep water, for example, there is a need for interconnection. For example, they may be, berthed in the harbor, and they need connection they need to come to on land. So I think for this, we're talking about military service here, and you need to define this clearly. So there could be types of services which are provided in Hong Kong, except that those on the warship would like to procure the service. Or is it that is already part of the establishment, but the vessel doesn't look like a warship? So what are we worried about? If you only talk about vessels, belong to the garrison, and you treat them as warships, then it's like the garrison site. That is, vessels owned by the garrison may not be used for a military purpose. The PLA site, they own the site, but the members are not members of the garrison, and it's open to public for public enjoyment, and yet they call it a military site. So for vessels which are used for military service, you have to provide a clear definition. You need to at least give us a paper explaining how you would define it. Right now, you say that you will not regard, you provide a very broad exemption, that is vessels which are not on military service. Thank you for the chairman and Mr. Kenneth Chan's concern. For other vessels on military service, it is our definition that that the vessel should be part of the military, fleet. When a fleet of warship comes to Hong Kong, the SAIG definitely would know. When you have a U.S. Fleet coming to Hong Kong, and amongst the fleet, you may have one or two supply ships, and they would need to tell us that these are part of the fleet. They are designated supply vessels. And for local vessels operating in Hong Kong, and you have a foreign fleet berthed in Hong Kong, And we have several local vessels supplying water and food to these military vessels. Then for these local vessels, they are definitely defined as local vessels, except that they are providing such services to the customers, and certainly they will be subject to our regulation. If you don't want to make the regulation too complicated, perhaps later on we can supply members with a paper setting out how we interpret this part and put on record what is our understanding and how this is going to operate going forward. And therefore we may not need to come up with a definition within the regulation itself. I don't know whether there are members who would ask to speak or in respect of this subsidiary legislation. If members were to speak, the Secretary will also have to respond. And when the Secretary responds, I will also explain this part clearly. I think, Madam Chair, you can rest assured, whether or not any members were to speak at the Council meeting, we'll put on record that when drafting the response to be given by the Secretary, we will certainly highlight the point that members have expressed this concern, and we will reiterate our official position again. So for vessels on military service, they will need to be within the establishment, and you shouldn't regard a yacht belonging to the admiral, for example, to be a military vessel. Well, Madam Chair, our understanding is that when the military fleet or the military organization tell us that the particular vessel is a vessel on military service, a vessel which may look inconspicuous, we may not know what is its military purpose. It's difficult for us to know in detail, about that vessel. But we know that there are only a very small number of such vessels, and I don't think they would, constitute a major problem. So I think we can look at it in that way. So I want to make sure that our yacht will not be treated as a military vessel.
Mr. Yik, okay, after listening to the Deputy Director, I'd like to paint you a worst scenario for your explanation. If it is within the establishment, it's clear, but if it is a 1+4, in other words, there are 4 ships tucked to the main vessel, I need that service, and I'm towing them all into Hong Kong. And you said that local vessels will not be included, but I need to rent or hire a local vessel. Say the fleet is 1+3, and one of the 3 smaller vessels will have to be repaired, and I need to hire a local vessel. I will tell you that this is a hired vessel. It is for military use while I'm in Hong Kong. There must be a record. Once this is declared, I think you should include that vessel. It is a vessel hired locally. And you say that is a local vessel. Well, of course, if it is hired locally, it should be using diesel with sulfur content of 0.05%, but I don't know. It may say, I don't trust the fuel you use. I think you might entrap me, so I am going to appoint a vessel, and that vessel would have told the Hong Kong SARG that this vessel is for temporary hire for part of the military service. Now, will you include that vessel then? Mr. Lai, in this example cited by Mr. Yik, our first reaction is we will certainly not prohibit the military or a military fleet from getting a local vessel to help. That is a commercial decision, and we wouldn't interfere. But Mr. Yik's analysis is that because of a special reason, it needs the service of a local vessel. That is actually a local vessel which has always been using local fuel. And then, naturally, we would think then that local vessel should be using local fuel. However, if there is a special case, because of certain reasons, a military fleet might appoint a vessel with an empty oil tank, and for that fleet to supply the fuel to that vessel, then I don't think, is there anything in the regulation? Let me try to respond to this example cited by Mr. Yik. And he calls this the worst case scenario. If a fleet comes into Hong Kong, it says it needs to get a local vessel. It amounts to towing a vessel into Hong Kong, whether that vessel is from Hong Kong or not. And in fact, it is already included in the establishment. And also, from that moment onwards, that vessel would be under the command of that military fleet. In that case, it means that it is already included in the establishment. But if the military fleet only needs a local vessel to ferry people on land, then this vessel will not be under the command of the commander of the military fleet. It is not part of the establishment. Under the IMO, the general practice is it should still bear its vessel number. In that case, if it uses fuel, then the fuel must be from Hong Kong. However, if it is already under the command of the fleet and it is a part of the establishment, then it will be exempted. I think we can separate the scenarios like this. But as I hear you, your concern is that it is only delivering pizza, but when it is caught, the operator may say, I'm just delivering pizza to the military fleet. Oh, no. Maybe I mince my words. It has given notification to the government that I have this vessel which has to be repaired in Hong Kong, and so I need to hire a local vessel in Hong Kong so that it is part of the fleet while I am in Hong Kong. So notification must be given to you. It is a local vessel, all right. However, it should be excluded. Is that right? There is this important point. If it is in or within the establishment, then it has exemption. I think the explanation is clear. In other words, we need to know whether it is under the command of the military fleet. Somehow, a vessel can be contracted locally, but if in a certain period of time it is under the command of the military, then you can regard it as any other vessel on military service. But if it is just for delivering of takeaway food, then it's not part of the fleet. It's just that people won't patronize you again if you can't deliver the order. I think that line is clearly drawn. I find it acceptable. I agree. Chairman, another thing. I agree Mr. Kenneth Chan's worry, and that is whether the commander of the garrison may have a yacht, and he might say that that is a vessel on military service. So how do you seek to interpret it? I would say if it is the asset of the military or garrison, then it must be a military vessel. Never mind what I use the vessel for. I can have a secret meeting on that yacht, because it will be difficult to define. Maybe this will be left to the fourth estate to report if this happens, as the chairman said. I won't say that any vessel of the military must be excluded. There might be some confusion. No, I think it's up to the garrison to exercise self-discipline. Or else, if it doesn't, there would just be a few more headline stories. Mr. Lai, can you also take us through Part A of the same paper? And that is, there should be no exemption under an emergency situation. Thank you, Chairman. At the last meeting, some members said that if a vessel operator supplies or borrows fuel from another vessel operator under unforeseen circumstances and the fuel supplied is substandard, would that constitute a breach of the law? According to the regulation, this is a clear case. The regulation says that we should use MLD. Anyone who supplies or causes to be supplied any MLD that does not comply with the regulation would breach the law. It will be regarded as an offense. Whether there is any consideration for the fuel supplied, that is not what we care about. A second case of breach is that suppliers and importers must do so according to the regulation of the government and keep the relevant records. If they can't keep the designated documents, again, that would be an offense. So the regulation is clear about breaches and offenses, unless there is exemption. We understand that at sea there may be accidents and where you need to get fuel from another vessel operator. But our view is, if the fuel is purchased from local suppliers, then the fuel should automatically be up to standard. If it is borrowed by another vessel, then there will be no risk to be borne by either party. Mr. Yik, I will again paint a difficult scenario for discussion. I'm concerned for Mr. Stephen Ho's supporters. They are in the outer sea, and it is getting dark, and the oil tank is empty. And there are no local vessels around. There are just mainland fishermen around. And mainland fuel is not up to the 0.05% standard. The vessel operator knows this. The fuel that he can get is not up to Hong Kong standard. But if I don't get the oil from mainland operators, I will have to drift in the sea for the whole night. But for my own safety, for the sake of saving my own life, I still need to use that kind of fuel, wouldn't I? This may happen, you know. Will you consider the amount of fuel borrowed? I'm talking about an emergency situation. And you can say, I would only limit it to a tank of 5 gallons, or I don't know whether you need 5 gallons or 10 gallons in order to come back to Hong Kong waters so that you meet up with local vessels again. Will you give some consideration to the amount of fuel borrowed? Or will you just say no? Mr. Lai. Chairman, maybe I kick off and Mr. Mok can carry on. The spirit of the regulation is to regulate supply. As for the user, which is the vessel, as to what fuel is in the tank, that is not the target of law enforcement. We are trying to tackle supply here. When will an offense be committed? If in Hong Kong waters there are 2 vessels which exchange MLD, and if they are caught by us and the fuel is found to be substandard, then we will prosecute the supplier. But I hope you understand. Well, I think you're clear. I hope you understand that in the regulation, we cannot include an exemption to say this is just between friends, or if you purchase a certain amount of fuel that is substandard, then you will not be breaching the law, etc. I think that will detract from the effectiveness of the regulation. I think you have already answered me. In other words, the user will not break the law. If it is an emergency and if a mainland fisherman supplies me with fuel, I'm still safe. Chairman, perhaps I can say a few words. The emergency situation, as Mr. Yik said, happens in the outer sea. Mr. Stephen Ho. Certainly, if the fuel is purchased in Hong Kong, then it shouldn't be a problem. Last time I mentioned that near Hong Kong boundaries, perhaps these problems can occur like in northeast or northwest territories. That is why I'm asking you to step up publicity. Tell people at what point they would break the law, and if you are being benevolent, you would still break the law. Okay, let me ask you this question. Supposing you're in Hong Kong waters. My vessel has no fuel. But I know on your vessel there is fuel that is substandard, but I borrowed 2 tanks from you. I know it, and still I get fuel from you. Would I break the law? Now, according to the regulation, you would be breaking the law because you supply the fuel. Is it that if I'm the user, I am not responsible? But what about the transaction itself? The one borrowing the fuel would not be breaking the law. The entire regulation tries to regulate supply and sale. But I agree with you that in publicity and promotion, we need to do more and clarify this. In fact, after the meeting, we'll continue to discuss with Mr. Ho to see how we can make this absolutely clear to the fishing industry. Any other questions? Mr. Kenneth Chan's letter, in fact, asks the administration to list the number of warships and any other vessel on military service going in and out of Hong Kong waters in the last 3 years, the trips and also the pollution emission into our air. So when you clarify how you define warships and any other vessel on military service, you should also answer this question. Okay, we'll do that after the meeting, Chairman. Let us go back to clause-by-clause examination. I think we have already got more discussion on clause 4. Now clause 5. Mr. Lai or Mr. Mok? Clause 5 is very technical. If you allow me, Chairman, I would explain 5(1) to 6 and then see whether members have questions. 5(1).
Marine light diesel importer to keep records. This is what the importer needs to do. Under bracket 1, a marine light diesel importer must A. For each batch of marine light diesel that the importer imports, and bracket 1, ensure that the batch is on receipt by the importer, accompanied by a fuel quality test report complying with section 6 bracket 1. And in a while we'll be explaining this, and that is who is going to issue the report, when will the test be conducted, and so on. Under bracket 2, keep the report during the 3 years after the date of the receipt. For 5 bracket B, for each batch of marine light fuel that the importer supplies or causes to be supplied, bracket 1, causes the fuel quality test report complying with section 6 bracket 2 to be issued for that batch before any marine light diesel is supplied or caused to be supplied from that batch. We explain in detail what are the requirements under section 6 bracket 2. Basically, we're talking about the date of the test and the quality of the fuels. Bracket 2, assign a reference number to the report. And bracket 3, keep the report during the 3 years after the date of the test. And C, for each transaction by which MLD is acquired or supplied by the importer, ensure that the transaction is evidenced by a document containing the particulars specified in subsection bracket 2, and keep the documents during the 3 years after the date of the transaction. And subsection 2, the particulars required under subsection 1 bracket C1 are the date of the transaction, and B, the product name of each batch of marine light diesel acquired or supplied, from which the classification of diesel may be ascertained, and C, the quantity of each batch of MLD acquired or supplied, and D, in the case of a supply, the name of the person to whom the MLD is supplied. Bracket 3, a marine light diesel importer must also, on or before the 15th day of each month, submit to the authority a report containing information regarding each batch of the MLD supply or cost to be supplied by the importer in the previous month. And bracket 4, person who fails without reasonable excuse to comply with subsection 1 commits an offence and is liable to conviction to a fine at level 5 and imprisonment for 1 month. Bracket 5, a person commits an offence if a person fails without reasonable excuse to comply with subsection bracket 3, or in purported compliance with subsection 3, submits a report which contains any information which the person knows to be incorrect or inaccurate in a material sense. And 2, recklessly submit a report which contains any information which is incorrect or inaccurate in a material respect. And 3, knowingly omits any material information from a report submitted. bracket 6. A person who commits an offence under subsection 5 is liable to, on conviction, to a fine at level 5 and imprisonment for 1 month. We've talked to the fuel importers and they feel that they're able to comply with these requirements. I'll read out Mr. Mok. In the clause-by-clause scrutiny, I think we can either stick to the English or the Chinese version of the regulations, unless members would like to are referring to both versions and have questions to raise. Our legal advisor is also here, so that whether we look at the English or Chinese version, she will diligently check whether or not the other version accurately reflects the true intention. Thank you very much. Now, do members have any questions? Well, I have one question. I'd like to go back to 1A, Roman 2. You require that the MLD imported, the importer will need to keep record for 3 years, and also that the report will need to be kept for 3 years upon the date of the testing. So there may be some discrepancy here, because after the fuel is being imported, every time the importer buys a batch of MLD, should the importer conduct the test, prepares the test report, or should it also supply the test report? So the 3 years, are we talking about the same 3-year period, or could there be a gap? Yeah, there might be a small gap there. Normally, the importer has a very prudent approach. When the fuels are imported to Hong Kong, there will be a test report. They want to ensure that the fuel unloaded into Hong Kong is up to standard. And the report is very close to the date of arrival of the fuel concerned. There may be a gap or a few days or a week. Ideally, if both reports could, I think that the date on which the records will no longer need to be kept should be the same. Otherwise, the discrepancy may give rise to some problems. Thank you, Madam Chair. We're talking about a 3-year period. So even though there may be a gap of a few days, but in actual operation there might not be, it may not make a major difference. Director, now according to my understanding, every time I buy something pursuant to a standard. I will ask the supplier to give me the test report. I will not take a sample of the fuel when it comes to Hong Kong and conduct a test, whether you buy any raw materials, be it metal or whatever. My understanding is that I will ask the supplier to give me the test report as well. It's very rare that I would need to conduct a test when the fuel arrives in Hong Kong. Perhaps I didn't explain myself clearly. We're talking about two things here. First of all, when the fuel importer, if he imports a batch of fuel into Hong Kong, we're not talking about the users. The importer will have a test report himself with a date. And we're saying that if the importer keeps that test report, then he need to keep it for 3 years from the date of the test. And if he subsequently sells the fuel to you, we're talking about a transaction date. Then, and he will need to keep records of the transaction document for 3 years. I think it's, in other words, 3 years from the date of the transaction. Otherwise, I wouldn't know when I have sold you the fuel upon they're being imported to Hong Kong. Let's say I imported this batch of fuel, A1234, and when they leave Singapore, the fuel already has come with a certificate. And I sell the fuel to this buddy here, and I keep a record of the date I sell him the fuel, what is the batch number, and so on. You can trace all that. We're talking about two separate purposes here. First, we need to clearly ensure that the fuel that he imports is up to standard. And secondly, if he sold the fuel to his customers, we can trace the transaction record. Because after the fuel has been imported, although we're talking about the same batch, even though the batch number is the same, but if later on I discover that he sells the fuel to somebody, somebody sells it again to a third party, if I want to trace back the supply chain, I will need to go look at the transaction records. Assuming that he doesn't have any business, he may have imported the oil for a year before he sells it to someone else. In order that I can trace back to the source, we're saying that when you conduct the transaction, you have to keep the transaction record for a period of 3 years. But there's no need to conduct further tests. No. There is no testing requirement. You're right. Only required to keep such a document. I just want to point out that the importers in Hong Kong shouldn't be required to conduct tests, because when the oil leaves Singapore, it already comes with a test report. Yes, that's right. Well, I have a follow-up question. Under 51B1, you require the importer to, for any MLD that he supplies, he would have to, prepare a report that complying with Section 6, Bracket 2. So this test report, are you asking the importer to arrange for the report or to arrange for a test so that a report could be obtained? All he needs to do is to supply a report. We're not saying that he needs to conduct a test every time he supply fuels to someone. The supplier would also know, and there are documents to prove that the fuel is up to standard. Well, the legal advisor has reminded me that in the English version regulation, it would be clearer if the intention is very clear if you use the word issue. But in the Chinese version, 安排為該次發出 arrange for that batch to be issued. I thought that you're talking about arranging a test here. So you may need to, when you conduct your promotion and publicity, you have to clearly explain the whole procedure. I think the English version is all right, but first reading of the Chinese text may lead to a different interpretation. Madam Chair, well, here we are basically focusing at the MLD importers. We've always been talking to them as to whether or not they can use a table or adopt some standard specifications. We just want to make sure that they understand the requirements. Under bracket 3, you say that they're required to prepare a report every month. Okay, do members have any further comments on Clause 5? If not, we can move on to Clause 6. Clause 6 is also technical, and I'll go through it first of all. Particulars to be contained in fuel quality test reports. Bracket 1, a fuel quality test report under Section 5(1)(a)(1) must contain the following. A, the name of the issuer of the report. B, the date of the test, and C, test methods and results of all the parameters of the MLD as set out in the following. Bracket 1 is the ISO specification, 2, the PLET specification, and 3, the motor vehicle diesel specifications. Bracket 2, a fuel quality test report under Section 5(1)(b)(1) must contain the following particulars. A, the name of the issuer of the report, and B, the date of the test, and C, the reference number of the fuel tank from which the sample is taken, and D, the test methods and results of the following parameters of the MLD, namely the density and the sulfur content and the classification of the MLD. So this is to enable us to know what type of fuel it is. All right. Any questions on Clause 6? If not, we move on to Clause 7. Clause 7, marine light diesel sulfur supplier to keep records. Bracket 1. An MLD supplier must, for each transaction by which MLD is acquired or supplied by the supplier, A. Ensure that the transaction is evidenced by a document containing the particulars specified in subsection 2, and B. Keep the document during the 3 years after the date of the transaction. 2. The particulars required under section 1, bracket A are: A. The date of the transaction. B. The product name of each batch of the MLD acquired or supplied from which the classification of the diesel may be ascertained. And C. The quantity of each batch of MLD acquired or supplied. And D. In the case of an acquisition, the name of the person from whom the MLD is acquired. And bracket 3. Person who fails without reasonable excuse to comply with subsection 1 commits an offence and is liable on conviction to a fine at level 5 and imprisonment for 1 month. Any follow-up on this part, members? I'd like to follow up on 2 bracket D of clause 7. That is, the transaction may involve the same party. Under what circumstances do we need to invoke 2D? If there is a resale, let's say he sells it to B, B sells it to D, to C. So here we're talking about a small quantity of fuel. Yeah, it's a small quantity involved. I think, yes, Madam Chair. Well, the agent will not sell the fuel to B, C, and D. And this takes us back to the scenario where I may suddenly need to buy fuel from someone else because I'm running out of fuel and I'm stranded at sea. But then you may need to tell the users, like Mr. Ho's constituents, that they need to be careful in this scenario. If you help somebody acquire fuel, or if they sell fuel to somebody else, they will also need to keep records of such transactions, right?
Let us go back to clause 2. The definition on supplier. It says means a person who carries on a business of supplying marine light diesel. In other words, if it is just an emergency situation, it is not a business. But members, please note that this is to regulate supplier, not importer. Clauses 5 and 6 are to supervise importers, and they are stricter. There are tests to be done, etc. But clause 7 is on supplier. They do not deal in retail or wholesale, but they have to keep records because there can be transaction between persons. I was asking about this point. If a person can just buy MLD from another person, is that common in the industry? From what we know, this is not common because we are talking about special oil supply vessels. They need to be approved by the Marine Department. Also, they conduct the business at designated places. If you ask the importer directly for fuel, the prices would be better. So we expect these people to get fuel from importers instead of getting it from other people. That would be very uncommon. Any other questions? Yes? Can I please add one point? Yes, DOJ. On your question, Chairman, I hope I have understood you correctly. And that is the person is a natural person, an individual. But bracket 2D, the person here is not limited to natural person. It could be a company or a supplier. In other words, you are trying to control the distributors. Exactly, I have betrayed my background, which is not legal. No other questions? Clause 8. Chairman, authority may request records. Bracket 1. The authority may, by notice in writing, require any person to submit to the authority within the time specified in the notice any report, document, or other record which the person is required to keep under this regulation. 2. A person commits an offence if the person A fails without reasonable excuse to comply with the notice under subsection 1, or B, in purported compliance with the notice under subsection 1, Roman 1, submits a report, document, or any other record which contains any information which the person knows to be incorrect or inaccurate in a material respect. Roman 2, recklessly submits a report, document, or any other record which contains any information which is incorrect or inaccurate in a material respect. Or Roman 3, knowingly omits any material information from a report, document, or any other record which is submitted. Bracket 3. A person who commits an offence under subsection 2 is liable on conviction to a fine at level 5 and to imprisonment for 1 month. Members' questions? Yes, Mr. Yik. Chairman, I'm concerned about bracket 1. Within the time as specified in the notice, but we don't know for how long. I'm concerned that the time specified could be within 3 days, and the company may say it is insufficient time to dig up records. So can you put in a bracket to say normally not less than a week or not less than 2 weeks? How do you interpret time specified in the notice? Chairman, let me explain why we say time specified instead of stipulating not less than how many days, etc. This is because when something happens, and if I understand correctly, in fact, within a limited time of a case happening, if prosecution is not taken out, then no follow-up will be possible. That is why. Now, since we don't know that upon discovery of a case, how much time we have, there may be something that is very urgent, and we might need to get information from the parties involved as soon as possible. Therefore, we only say time specified. Similar arrangements can be found under other regulations of the Air Pollution Control Ordinance, even in the ordinance itself. The authority, it is said, can request the party involved to supply information within time specified. So it's the same arrangement. But of course, when law enforcement is conducted, there must be consideration about reasonableness. But we have to be mindful about the urgency of the matter. Chairman, but I think you should write in a reasonable time, because sometimes when public opinion is rife, officials can act irrationally. You may say, do something tomorrow or before tomorrow, and you will subject people to undue difficulty. And that has happened. That is why I need a reasonable time. If something happens, people have to dig up the records, and you can't possibly ask me to do that within tomorrow, for example. So at least you put in a reasonable time frame. Mr. Lai? Mr. Yik, why do we not stipulate a definitive time period, like how many days, for the supplier to respond to our request? It is because we don't know what is going to happen, and so we would decide on individual cases. If it is a non-urgent case, if we ask the oil companies to supply a lot of information spanning over a long period of time, then we can give him or it more time. But if it is a suspicion of a supplier supplying substandard oil at this very moment, we want to get to the truth, and if it is necessary, we want to stop the action from being carried on, and we will give less time. I hope you will trust the administration. We'll have to look at the seriousness or severity of each case and whether it is urgent. We are always reasonable, be assured. Well, Chairman, I have already said that indeed some government departments have made unreasonable requests for the industry to comply with their orders, and that is why I'm concerned that there is no time specified here. Okay, you have heard members' worries. Chairman, you can rest assured that we are always fair. We always have the public interest in mind. When we read laws, Mr. Lai, you may be reasonable, but the law is going to be enforced by other people, and therefore you may not be in a position to say this on their behalf. Clause 9. Determination of sulfur content of marine light diesel. For the purposes of this regulation, the sulfur content of marine light diesel other than motor vehicle diesel must be determined in accordance with the test method set out in any of the documents specified in Schedule 2. This is very technical. Talk about the test methods. Yes, Schedule 2 is very technical. Schedule 1 now. Specifications of marine light diesel. 1. Any marine light diesel must either be A. Light diesel oil which bracket 1 complies with the specifications except for sulfur content. Bracket capital A defined for category ISO FDMA in the ISO specifications. Or capital B defined for gas oil 0.05% sulfur in the Platts specifications. And Roman 2 has a sulfur content not exceeding 0.05% by weight, or B, motor vehicle diesel. Any questions? If not, Schedule 2. Thank you, Chairman. Test methods for determining sulfur content. 1. ENISO 20884:2011, Petroleum Products, Determination of Sulfur Content of Automotive Fuels, Wavelength Dispersive X-ray Fluorescence Spectrometry, published by the European Committee for Standardization. 2. ENISO 14596:2007, Petroleum Products, Determination of Sulfur Content Wavelength Dispersive X-ray Fluorescence Spectrometry, published by the European Commission for Standardization. 3 years as ISO 8754:2003, Petroleum Products, Determination of Sulfur Content Energy Dispersive X-ray Fluorescence Spectrometry, published by the European Committee for Standardization. 4. ASTM D703913, Standard Test Method for Sulfur in Gasoline, Diesel Fuel, Jet Fuel, Kerosene, Biodiesel blends, and Gasoline Ethanol blends by monochromatic wavelength dispersive X-ray fluorescence spectrometry, published by the ASTM International. 5. ASTM D545312, Standard Test Method for Determination of Total Sulfur in Light Hydrocarbons, Spark Ignition, Engine Fuel, Diesel Engine Fuel, and Engine Oil by Ultraviolet Fluorescence, published by the ASTM International. And number 6, ASTM D429410, Standard Test Method for Sulfur in petroleum and petroleum products by energy dispersive X-ray fluorescence spectrometry, published by the ASTM International. Mr. Mock, please stop here. From 1 to 6, any questions? I'd like to thank Mr. Mock for reading it all out. But in fact, when we do clause by clause, you don't need to read out every word. You can just highlight the purpose of the clauses. Members would have read all the papers and the regulation. We just need to know the purpose of the constructions, especially Schedule 2. Even if you read it all out, we don't exactly understand it. Okay, so let us not continue to read the rest of the the regulation. Just let members know what follows. Well, those are also methods for testing the sulfur content and also the Chinese translations. It gives the English original and also the Chinese translations provided to them. If you are interested, you should go for the original version. I think this would best be left for the industry to know. This subcommittee may not be able to go into all the details. That's all for Schedule 2. Explanatory note. Mr. Mock, would you like to take us through the explanatory note? Yes, Chairman. 1, 2, and 3 have to do with the interpretation, commencement date, etc. Clause 4, what the specification is. And under 3A and B, we state clearly that the sulfur content should not exceed 0.05% by weight. And number 5, it stipulates that the importer has to keep records and it has to supply to the authority the batches supplied in the last month. And number 6, the test reports. And then number 7, that the suppliers have to keep transaction records, and then the authority is given authority to request for records stipulated by this regulation. Number 9, it talks about the schedule, etc. Thank you, Chairman.
Regarding Clause 4, the English version is very clear, but the translation is very difficult to understand. In English, it is specification and sulfur content. It's not applied to this regulation, but the Chinese version is very confusing. In this regulation, there are no regulation. Well, may I propose that in respect of 3A and bracket B and the specifications thereon, the sulfur content requirement does not apply to this provision. It's as simple as that. Because the Chinese translation is very difficult to understand. Fortunately, the explanatory notes is not legally binding. Okay, we've heard members' view, and we hope we will come up with another draft that is more easily comprehensible. The English version is instead, and the Chinese rendition is 取而代之. But I don't think you need to translate in such a literal manner. You're making it very difficult to understand. Well, they need to, interpret it in this manner. I think law drafting and translating, the legislation into Chinese is a very difficult task. I think the example I suggested, is just like the English version. That is, the sulfur content, specification doesn't apply to this particular regulation. It could simply be a literal, direct literal translation. Please consider my suggestion. So the question is whether or not there are any specifications which apply. So I think the main direction is that when we draft legislation in Chinese, we need to be accurate. The text would need to be easily understandable, and it would need to be, in proper Chinese style. All right. If there are no further follow-up, then I think we've covered the explanatory notes also. So with that, we have completed our clause-by-clause scrutiny of the regulation. Could the Secretary tell us about the date? The committee will need to submit a report to the House Committee on the 20th of February. And deadline for moving CSA will be extended to the 19th. Or rather the 12th of March. If members wish to speak in respect of this regulation, please inform the Secretariat. I helped Mr. Kenneth Chen follow up on the question regarding warships and military surface. The administration has given us an explanation. They will also provide a paper to explain in detail the explanation. When the Secretary, speaks on this regulation, he would put a record in hand that when he gives his verbal response, we'll have his response on record. Then it would be much better than just simply replying us by replying to our questions, by way of a paper. Yeah, I'm sorry, I need to attend another meeting earlier. So whether it's a verbal or a written response, we're talking about exemption here. So I think we need to be more stringent. So far, I'm not happy with the response given by the administration today yet. So I hope the Secretary will give a more clearer description, before when we debate on this. So perhaps when Mr. Kenneth Chen and I speak on this regulation, we will do that. So you don't need to issue another circular. Just remember to sign that, document. And Mr. Lai, please ask the Secretary to, give a clear explanation on the part regarding warships and military service when they respond to members' questions.